Question for David Payne.
And let me point out where I'm putting a couple of high-level financial slides in front of you if you're interested in that.
He's handing out propaganda.
Whenever I can.
First question. Yes, Cynthia.
What's been the experience for the businesses that have been involved in your pilot right now? Have they increased business as a result of this, improved margins? And what's been the reaction of the customers?
You're talking about the end Wi-Fi customers? For the Wi-Fi? It's a little early because we've really only been about 2 months. We are finding that businesses sort of fall on a spectrum of kind of what they care about. Some are very interested in the Wi-Fi. Some that don't have tables are more interested in sort of our online advertising. But it probably goes back to the calculation I did before that local business owners are driving by Starbucks, and they're driving by McDonald's, and they know there's something there with Wi-Fi, but no one's kind of answering why. So I guess the direct answer to your question is we probably haven't been in the market all that long, but we are seeing folks very interested in sort of participating in the product. And free Wi-Fi, I mean, consumers, particularly ones with these sort of next generation devices, absolutely love having it as an amenity.
Tom, go ahead.
Help me a little bit. I'm not sure I fully understand the cost and revenue side of your model. So if you could walk through what's it cost you to deploy a Murphy's, what is he paying you, and it sounds like you got a 7-month break even, but walk us through this so we understand a little bit better.
Sure. So we put a device which we model at $100. It costs us $80. There's a little difference, I guess, between Atlanta and how we model future markets. But when we model future markets, we think allocated sort of initial market costs, which it costs us about $40,000 to launch a new market. So allocated market costs somewhere around $100. So you kind of call that $200. And direct and indirect sort of sales and marketing are right around $80. So in a couple years, and not very far from now, with a blended ARPU, a customer payment every month of around $38, that's where I kind of get that $7 number. In Atlanta, it's a little different. Tom pays us, the economics are roughly the same, but we just don't think about it the same way. So Tom pays us $35 per month, put the Wi-Fi router in, and so the cost to kind of install it and the cost of the hardware and that sort of marketing cost that I mentioned to sort of get that customer, how we're sort of calculating that sort of break even.
Okay, so the business owner then is your revenue stream.
That's right.
And you inferred that there's going to be a big ad revenue stream here. And so how does that all work if they're generating all the user content and with the $35 they get to rotate across the splash of the front screen? How does advertising play into your model?
Right. So when I talk about managed services eventually becoming advertising, the way we think about it and the way we've modeled it is these are our only 2 primary sources of online advertising right now. We triangulated those over time. We compared them to sort of CPMs and billboards and sort of things to make sure they were reasonable. We just we grow them. We grow them based on what we think estimated traffic from hotspots are going to be and non-hotspots. So, right now, our primary revenue, 70% in 2008, is from folks paying us $35 a month for managed Wi-Fi. We think over time, what we're really doing, we're putting billboards in these local businesses. It's just not seen that way right now. Over time, it will be seen that way. And so this sort of local advertising will grow. So all of this won't even be considered managed Wi-Fi, in the future. It'll all be sort of online. But the way we treat it right now in the model and the way we think about it over time is we just sort of grow these based on them being more sort of interactive and more success-based than, a billboard. Does that answer your question?
Well, I'm confused. So if I'm sitting in Murphy's as a consumer, I sign on to the web. I'm going to go to Murphy's homepage first, right?
This is the first thing you'll see.
Okay. So, but if I'm Murphy's, I don't want to be paying you $35 a month to have my competitors advertising down here.
We actually haven't seen that to be much of a problem. 35 is so low, and the businesses more often than not are seeing actually this is kind of a huge sort of advantage. We're actually not seeing.
But how much value? So if I'm an advertiser and you've got 2 spots you can advertise on, and you got 75 local businesses, scrolling through there, how many page views am I going to get?
Actually, a pretty decent amount. We, in front of you, there's a breakdown of what we consider sort of our CPMs, and this was real important to us for the model. I'm not an ad guy. I don't understand before this, I didn't understand CPMs. We have a CPM given sort of estimated traffic from our hotspot and online, which online is practically nothing in the first 2 years. An estimated CPM of about $2 or $3. And when we were at Earthlink and we were doing location-aware CPMs, you heard $20, $30. You know that's not reality. But a couple of dollars for being able to click on this and have it change to your neighborhood and all of your information show up if you're Bella Cucina, 2 or 3 CPMs are not, we don't think are out of the ballpark.
Fred?
So is the objective to provide kind of neighborhood blanket coverage? So let's say I'm in the park, for instance, in between 2 Wi-Fi hotspots. I mean, are you trying to be a provider of, blanket coverage in that regard?
That's how we start. We actually, in the beginning, we thought that's maybe what we would do. So 9 months ago, we thought outdoor's not working, indoor, there seems to be something there. And I didn't mention it, but these devices are about 5 times more powerful than anything you have in these stores. So it actually kind of bleeds out a little bit. But no, that's not what we're trying to do now. In retail hubs like a Vinings or like a Virginia Highlands, you'll probably think of it that way. Users will probably see SkyBlox free Wi-Fi SSID a lot and think they have outdoor Wi-Fi coverage. That's not the goal. It's not persistent RF coverage.
So it's meant to be very specific to the location. I'm inside Murphy's, and I've got the Murphy's, banner, and there's no confusion about that. So if I walk next door, I had a question too, just about kind of the density of areas that you were trying to address, and was that a factor? But it was mostly related to that first comment.
So, 15 of the 30 businesses on the corner of Virginia and North Island have this. The best example, or maybe the worst of what you're talking about, is 2 retail stores that are right next to each other. We've seen no interference issues. We can dial down the power if we need to, but we haven't had to so far. And Wi-Fi, and let me make sure I answer your question, Wi-Fi, the nice thing about it is it defaults to the strongest signal. So when you're in Virginia Highlands, you won't see 10 SSIDs of SkyBlox free Wi-Fi. You'll see the strongest. And so you'll connect. There is a potential someone sitting on Murphy's patio, and we have a store next to Murphy's, and there's a little bit of a signal mix-up, but we don't think that's going to happen that often. And if it's not
the last thing I had was you kind of made some reference to leveraging sort of other sources of local content. Did I understand that correctly? I mean, what are the ways in which you could do that in the future? Everything you're showing us here is generated by your population of businesses, right?
That's right.
But how would you envision kind of, playing in the ecosystem of local content more broadly?
I mean, I think that the folks like the Creative Loafings, the Yelps of the world, I don't know if you're familiar, they're like a user-generated city search. We could have chosen at the beginning to do some sort of business development deal with them. We didn't, because we think it's exciting, this sort of user-generated thing that we've done. But we certainly could, and we think there'd be a lot of value to that. On the cover of the Journal today is a Washington Post did a hyperlocal business in Virginia Highlands, and I scanned the article really quickly. A lot of local media providers want hyperlocality. They just don't know how to do it. And the reason this Washington Post pilot failed, and this is what the point of the article was, is that they didn't have this feet on the street. They weren't sitting down with Tom Murphy and saying, this is how it works. So we think there's a lot of potential, but we're actually not in talks right now with any folks like that, not until we get scale.
Mark?
Just in terms of the companies you have signed up to date in the local neighborhood, is it segmented broadly, or is it pretty narrowly based? And how do you kind of think of a neighborhood? Does it make it as you roll out? Do you think about, it's the 4 or 5 premium neighborhoods in a city, or is it 20 neighborhoods in a city?
We model right now, there's 15 neighborhoods in a city the size of Atlanta, and that grows to maybe 25 over time. When I first thought about that, I thought, that's not true, but actually in one of your handouts, we shows all of our neighborhoods in Atlanta. I mean, there's easily, in a city like Atlanta, well over, especially when you start hitting suburbs, and things like that. We don't even consider like a Vinings or a Decatur part of our initial launch. It's part of that 15. And then was your beginning of your question, was it about what kind of stores? In my mind, when we were kind of starting this, I always thought 30% of the stores in these neighborhoods are going to be stores with tables, so they're going to love the Wi-Fi. One thing I didn't mention about this is that when you go to our www page and you choose Virginia Highlands, and you get this, so you're at your home or your office, this is a random rotation of all the businesses paying for Wi-Fi in that neighborhood. So if we had 10% of the time you'd see this. So imagine if on City Search, 10% of the time, Murphy's was half of their Virginia Highlands page. So this is a roundabout way of saying places with tables want the Wi-Fi. Other people consider the $35 advertising. Actually, we did the math earlier this week. 58% of our pilot participants don't have tables. They're not restaurants. So we think that's, over time, I think that's maybe won't hold, but we certainly will get a large percentage of just regular walk-in retail stores.
Chris? Go ahead.
In this online channel, you have some breakdown in terms of, I guess, is it 9 visits per Wi-Fi spot per day? Meaning if you have a
That's
Wi-Fi,
right.
is that actual numbers? Meaning, is that a model, or is that actually sitting down going after a week with Murphy's? You get on average 9 visitors a day on that spot.
It's about what we're seeing, but to provide some numbers, there's a company in Atlanta that does Wi-Fi hotspots. They get about 6 per day. There's a company called Anchor Free. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. They're doing our exact model, except they're mailing out routers and doing national advertisements. So you have a persistent toolbar when you're in one of these businesses. You get a Google search, and you get a Chrysler and a Bank of America ad. Our model's very different, therefore, but the idea is an average Anchor-free site gets 17 per day. So they're probably asking for the free router because they know they're going to get a lot of traffic, but we think 9 is a reasonable estimate in the beginning from what we've seen. And the 9 came from sort of splitting the difference between the Anchor-free and what we've seen with the local hotspot company.
And is the ad modeled? If I want to put if I'm a business in that area, do I have to have one of your routers, or do I go on to your SkyBlox, and any business can say, hey, I'm in that zip code as well, I want to be listed?
So anyone for free can sign up, and they show is blue. Anyone can do this. It doesn't have to be the businesses. And actually, to make that particular point, it's not listed here, but that last tab called upgrades, businesses do this themselves. So they actually will go onto their own tab, whether they're paying or non-paying, Wi-Fi or not, and they'll see all the neighborhoods in Atlanta. They'll click Midtown, and they'll hit save. They'll start rotating automatically through that little area. So it's self-service advertising.
And have you done any user analysis in terms of go up to those 9 visitors on a day that are I guess surfing at Murphy's, and what's the value to them?
First, it's the free Wi-Fi. That's, I don't know if y'all saw the Starbucks announcement yesterday, but they're going to do the free Wi-Fi. That's the top level answer. We think over time, and we don't model this for years. If you look at that, we don't model being a true online source for 3 years, being equivalent of like a creative loafing. The other advantage besides the Wi-Fi is this is real time, and this doesn't exist anywhere. So if Tom Murphy says we've got wine tasting on Thursday night, it's maybe on his website, he's maybe emailing his customers, but it's certainly not aggregated in any sort of snapshot of what's going on in Virginia Highlands. So I would say that's the second part. I mean, sure, you're going to log on this like you do at an airport or hotel, and you're going to be like, don't care about anything about this. And then you're going to hit take me to the internet at the top, and it's just going to go to CNN.com or whatever you typed. But some people will. Certainly they'll love the free Wi-Fi, but some people will be like, wow, I never knew in Virginia Highlands that occurred. And we actually saw that. A woman who lived a block from our pilot for a decade didn't know on a Tuesday night one of the local businesses was actually doing something. Doing I forget what it was. It was a wine tasting or something. So I guess that's for a user perspective, free Wi-Fi, and the real-time events, kind of what they see in the beginning.
Adam, go ahead.
Getting back to the revenue model, I mean, you talk about feet on the street and everything else, which is an expensive way to do it, and $35 a month. Let's say you sign up 20 customers, which not an insignificant amount of effort. At $35 a month, you're talking about $700 of revenue a month.
Sure.
How are you going to make money?
In a city like Atlanta, we begin with a penetration of between maybe 10 and 15%. Like I mentioned, we have a break-in at about 16. So that given sort of what we think the market is in Atlanta for these businesses. That's probably about 200 businesses. And then over time, we layer in them doing sort of advertising. And there is a break even after 2 cities, 3 cities. And that's when that, like I mentioned, we want to be in 3 cities by the end of this year. That's kind of where that comes in. So in a city like Atlanta, we won't be in Atlanta, have 300 hotspots and break even. We'll be in Atlanta, Nashville, New Orleans, Washington, D.C. It'll be 2 years from now. The advertising revenue will have transitioned and become a little more robust. But we can profitably have a model being managed Wi-Fi in 3 markets. It's not a gangbusters model. It's not the model we plan. It's not the model anyone will invest in. But that can be the model until this turns into sort of real-time content advertising.
And maybe walk us through a little bit about that. The cost of sales and everything else. You're talking 1,000 businesses is $35,000 a month, right?
Those 3 people who are doing the sales, how much they cost you versus what they're bringing in?
So, I think it was kind of encompassed in kind of what that math I sort of did before. We took our sales force and we sort of said it was about $75 or $80, for that person. So if you take what it costs to launch it, what it costs to send the feet on the street, and they're expensive, don't get me wrong, and the cost for that router and to install, it's about 7 months of that $35.
Got about 3 minutes. Another question?
Yeah, let me ask you about your
Ann?
prior company, Cosmo. Cosmo had a superior customer experience.
Don't hold that against me with the Cosmo thing.
That's all right. Well, why don't you talk about lessons learned, because they had a really superior customer experience and didn't succeed. So what were lessons learned and what are you applying?
Sure. So Cosmo was a delivery in an hour business model. We had 12 markets in the United States. It was like a web van, but we had 10,000 square foot warehouses in kind of a hub and spoke around cities. The lessons learned in relation to this, growing markets, that's what I did. I was the first hire of a team that became 25 people, the strategic growth team. And I launched all those markets, and I managed a team over time to launch those markets. I think the biggest lesson was you got to be there to do local. Eventually Tom Murphy is going to do Google. They're sitting in Mountain View and he's sitting in Atlanta. And eventually, however long, 5 years, 10 years, they're going to have a robust offering for him that's really local. For now, he's not going to do it. And you think people don't have feet on the street in these businesses? They do. The city searches, the Yelp, the people who are trying to generate this local, even if they say they don't, they do have local feet on the street. So my biggest learning from Cosmo, if you're going to be local, you have to be there.
Did he nail it? 2 minutes? Y'all have any more questions? All right, Mark, go ahead.
One more. Do you have any specific IP to protect the business, or is it just one of trying to, control a neighborhood or a city and then roll out and try and be best provider in that area?
It's more of a kind of a first mover momentum. I think if you look at some of the sort of next generation models like this, like a Yelp or, it's really about sort of getting sort of out there. So no, there's nothing that we think. There could be, and we're going to look at it at the right time, but there's nothing I can point to from an IP that can be protected.
Okay. CEO David Payne, thank you.